The boardroom lights weren't warm enough to hide the coldness in the room. Cold stares, eyes looking away, and the kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but detachment. Kim Kardashian sat at the head of the table, staring at the final slide of the quarterly presentation, her former company's logo, now branded with a fresh new tagline, courtesy of a global creative advisory team recently brought in. They called it a new breath. For Kim, it was the final breath of a long chapter built on belief. She was never the CEO. She was the voice behind the vision, the emotional strategist who transformed Nexora Media from a niche agency into one of the most sought-after names in the digital content space, from anti-depression campaigns using personalized video narratives to AI-powered visual healing programs. Kim had redefined what emotional marketing meant in the post-pandemic era. For 8 straight years, she lived and breathed this brand. There were no early nights, no clear line between home and office. The edit suite had become a sanctuary for creativity, for breakdowns, and for breakthroughs. She had cried there, laughed there, even felt reborn there when a stranger once messaged your video, kept me from ending it all that night. And yet today, they looked at her like expired inventory. We're moving in a new direction. Caleb Vance, Nexora's new CEO, stood at the front, nearly 15 years her junior. His resume glittered with fintech successes. The board had brought him in to maximize deep revenue potential. Kim didn't oppose innovation, but she knew he didn't understand media, at least not the kind with a heart, and that direction doesn't include me. Her voice was calm, not raised, not pleading. Caleb adjusted his Armani shirt collar, eyes not meeting hers. The board believes it's time to restructure the creative group. New faces, bolder thinking, modern approaches. New faces, she understood. The unspoken keywords younger, cheaper, more compliant. When did someone like her, who had brought the brand to life, who once was mocked as just a pretty face, but proved her vision and intellect become a problem to eliminate Kim, left the room in silence. No tears, no outburst, just a quiet crumbling inside. In the hallway, James, her longtime collaborator, approached. What the hell just happened? She didn't slow down. Good question, but I'm not the one who should answer. Her office was small but full of character. A ceramic lamp from her Humanity and Marketing Award, a Polaroid from the first team campaign that went viral, a box of handwritten letters from users. Kim was the last in the company to still write notes by hand to their community. Now everything had to be packed. HR handed her a separation file, 3 months pay standard policy, a thin sheet to close out 8 years. She said nothing, no protest. Caleb didn't even show. He sent a message through his assistant, wishing you all the best. She let out a soft laugh. So polite. It was almost inhuman. That night, Kim returned to her high-rise apartment in Los Angeles. The kitchen was cold, tea, untouched. The city lights spilled shadows across the floor, but nothing felt alive. Too quiet to keep pretending she was okay. She played an old video, the opening clip of the See Me Now campaign. She had written the voiceover, "In a world that never stops talking. Sometimes all we need is someone to truly see us." Kim stared at the screen. The words she once wrote felt like they belonged to someone else. She used to believe in real value, in relationships that meant something, that if she created something meaningful, people would hold on to her. She was wrong. Her phone lit up with a message. "Victoria West, I heard. Meet me in the morning. We need to review your contract." They met in a small cafe in Venice. Victoria was her longtime legal partner, sharp, unsmiling, but razor intuitive. "This clause isn't okay," Victoria said, scanning the termination terms. "They're keeping lifetime usage rights to content you created without crediting you." Kim sighed, not surprised. Victoria looked up, eyes sharp. But did you retain copyright to your handwritten concept drafts and those voice samples you recorded at home? Kim nodded. All of it was written in my personal workspace, backups on my external drive, audio stored in a separate private cloud, time-stamped. Victoria paused, then smiled rarely. Then they missed one tiny thing, but that tiny thing might cost them everything. Some battles aren't fought with rage, just a wooden desk, a handwritten notebook, and a mind that has never accepted defeat. Kim Kardashian was never the type to destroy. She reconstructed in her minimalist apartment. She began piecing back together the fragments of the campaigns she once built, original ideas, unused voice drafts, scripts that had been shelved for being too emotional for commercial use. They were scattered in notebooks, in midnight voice memos, in places where her soul had whispered ideas when the world had gone quiet. Victoria guided her through the process of copyright registration, not under her own name, but through a private holding company, where Kim was the sole shareholder, a shell, legally, a treasure chest. In truth, you don't need to sue, Victoria said during a closed-door strategy meeting. You just need to own the rights. The moment they try to launch a new platform using your ideas and discover you hold the license, everything turns. Kim thought for a moment. She never liked confrontation, but building a chessboard where her opponent runs out of moves, that was her strength. For 6 weeks, Kim lived in 2 separate realities. To the outside world, she looked like a woman on a break, recovering from professional turbulence, posting nothing but photos of herbal tea, ocean light, and book covers. No statements, no drama. But inside, a plan was taking shape, silent and deliberate. She began reviving old ideas under new forms. First, she reached out to 3 former collaborators, people who had stayed loyal not just to her, but to the original vision of emotional storytelling. James coordinated the team discreetly. No announcements, no digital trace. Next, they built a private experimental platform, one that used AI not just for content creation, but for emotional resonance. It analyzed tone, silence, hesitation, memory. It didn't generate stories. It reconstructed what people truly felt. It was a prototype of the emotional interface she had proposed at Nexora, once rejected for being too idealistic. She called it Kinetica, short for Kim's emotional narrative intelligence technology for content advancement. It wasn't built to raise capital. It was built to show up at the right time. Then came the signal. James sent a short email. They just announced Nexora's new AI lab. Interface design is 70% identical to your original concept. Kim smiled, not with bitterness, but with the calm of someone who already knew how this would end. Victoria tapped her fingers on the edge of the table. Are you ready? Kim looked up. You know me. I'm not coming back to reclaim the old seat. I'm coming back to rewrite the rules. A week later, Nexora Media hosted their spring press conference, unveiling what they called their proprietary AI emotional storytelling platform. Caleb Vance stood confidently on stage, calling it the future of humanized content strategy. On the massive LED screen behind him, they played a sample prototype at that exact moment. Kinetica went live, no confrontation, just a perfectly timed coincidence engineered with precision. The launch of Kinetica was accompanied by a short-form video series called Behind the Feels, featuring voiceovers that had once been rejected, but now, when paired with the right visuals, reached millions. Each clip included detailed credits, origin notes, emotional context, creation dates all time-stamped and registered under Kim's holding company. The first to notice were creators. Then came the analysts, Content experts began publishing side-by-side comparisons. Nexora's new platform looked suspiciously close to Kim Kardashian's early drafts, many of which were never publicly released. Within 48 hours, media outlets picked up the thread. Legal blogs raised concerns over IP rights. On LinkedIn, debates erupted. What does it mean when real creators are erased from their own innovations? Caleb Vance said nothing, but inside the company, chaos had begun. James texted legal team is rechecking every document related to you. Kim didn't reply. She was in San Francisco, meeting with a private delegation from HeartSync, a global therapeutic content platform seeking AI emotion integration. They had seen Kinetica, and they wanted licensing rights for a global deployment. The offer 8 figures. Kim didn't say yes. She smiled. I'm not here to sell and disappear. I want to partner and redefine how media touches the human spirit. Meanwhile, Nexora began feeling the tremors. The Veritas Journal published an exclusive internal sources confirm potential copyright issues within Nexora's AI lab. No mention of Kim by name, but none was needed. Victoria West posted one line on X: copyright isn't a victory. It's a reminder that truth still has a place. 30 minutes later, Nexora shut down all public demos of their new platform, citing technical review. But everyone understood the real reason. 1 week after Nexora quietly took down all demos of its newly announced AI platform, Caleb Vance appeared at a short industry seminar. His face looked visibly thinner, and the signature confidence that once defined his presence had noticeably eroded. Whispers circulated within the company. The board was growing impatient over what they now referred to as a costly misjudgment involving unresolved copyright complications. James, still working internally, messaged Kim with a blunt update. They're combing through every old archive, trying to find your drafts, but no one can locate anything. She didn't react outwardly. She had seen this coming. Everything she had ever built, the emotional scripts, the foundational AI models, the narrative prototypes, had been carefully removed from the system long before her departure. Most of it wasn't even created on company time or equipment. And the original emotional AI blueprint that had been handwritten and mailed in a sealed envelope, never uploaded, never stored, never within their reach. They had never realized she'd already walked away long before they let her go. That evening, Victoria called. Her voice was calm, steady. As always, you've won the first round. Kim was sitting on her balcony, a cup of ginger tea in hand, the glow of her phone screen reflecting faintly in her eyes. Not yet, she said quietly. They still believe they can fix this. There was a pause. Then Victoria asked, more softly this time, then what is it that you want? Kim. She didn't hesitate. Not the old title, not revenge. I want them to face the truth they tried to erase. I want to rebuild something real from the trust they broke. I want to reclaim the space where creators are not disposable. On the other end of the line, Victoria's smile was so subtle it could have passed for a breeze. Then get ready, she said, because they're coming. Wednesday morning arrived under a soft gray sky stretching over Los Angeles. A pale cloud drifted across the tall glass windows of a quiet conference room inside the headquarters of HeartSync, a leading global platform focused on therapeutic content. Kim sat at the center of the room, surrounded by data scientists, market strategists, behavioral psychologists, and the company's executive board. On the screen in front of them, the official debut of Kinetica v2.0. The new version of her emotional content platform didn't just organize information. It translated biometric data into adaptive voice patterns, lighting states, musical resonance, and micro-narrative healing arcs, each designed to guide users through personal emotional journeys. when the presentation ended. No one spoke at first, not because they were unsure, but because they had all just felt something real. The company's head of content strategy, an older man with deep lines around his eyes, removed his glasses and wiped them silently. His voice was low when he finally spoke. I've never seen data feel like it had a soul. Kim didn't respond right away. She allowed the silence to settle, then moved to the final slide, letting the last line speak for her. Technology does not replace the human heart, but it can remind us how to feel again. There were no reporters, no press releases, just a signed document and agreement to deploy Kinetica on a global scale. The only non-negotiable clause, Kim retained full creative control. Later that day, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she drove past the Nexora building. The signage still gleamed, confident and proud, but inside, according to James, Caleb Vance had been officially suspended. Rumors had already begun circulating that the board was exploring a leadership change. And among the suggestions on the table was an idea that had once seemed unthinkable to bring Kim Kardashian back. She looked at the building not with nostalgia nor bitterness, but with the clear-eyed stillness of someone who had long since moved past the need for validation. She didn't walk in, not because she didn't want to, but because she no longer needed to. 2 days later, Victoria received a call from Eleanor Fitzgerald, chairwoman of Nexora Media. She relayed the message to Kim with quiet precision. She wants a private meeting. Kim didn't hesitate. All right, she said, but this time, there will be no cheap compromises. The meeting took place on the same top floor where Kim had once been dismissed, where she had been called a cost center and told her time had passed. This time, she sat at the head of the table, sunlight at her back instead of overhead. Eleanor's tone was direct, not defensive. We were wrong. She began, not just in how we handled your departure, but in how we misjudged the soul behind the work, the value of what can't be measured on a quarterly chart. Kim said nothing. Allowing the words to land, Eleanor continued, we'd like to reestablish a working relationship, not as a form of reparation, but to start again on a foundation that's finally right. Victoria opened her case, placed a clean document on the table, and slid it across with practiced calm. The conditions were clear. Kim would hold full creative autonomy over any and all content she produced. Kinetica would be integrated into Nexora's ecosystem, but as a co-owned intellectual property with dual governance. Kim would occupy a strategic board seat with veto power on all AI creative applications. And most importantly, Nexora would establish an independent creator protection fund, directly financed by the platform's growth revenue, a structural commitment to honoring the very voices they once overlooked. Eleanor didn't look surprised. She simply asked one question, why come back? Kim. After all of this, Kim smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from vindication, but the quiet kind, born of having walked through fire and come out whole, because there are values that need to be rebuilt, she said, so that the next generation of creators won't have to lose everything just to be acknowledged. Eleanor nodded. Then let's begin again under your terms. Weeks passed. Nexora remained silent in the media, but internally, the gears were grinding. After the agreement with Kim, small tremors began surfacing, quiet shifts in strategy, meetings behind closed doors, reassessments of leadership. Caleb Vance, now formally dismissed, left without a statement. His exit was noted in a single footnote on an industry blog. No one mourned it, because the real story wasn't about who left, it was about who had returned, inside Nexora's campus. Whispers grew louder. She's back. We underestimated her. But Kim didn't issue a press tour. She didn't take to social media with vindication. She worked, quietly, methodically, and with complete clarity, under her leadership. Kinetica began internal testing within the Nexora ecosystem. The system wasn't just a tool, it was a philosophy. It didn't automate storytelling. It recentered it around real people, real memories, real pain and recovery. Then came the public reveal. It wasn't a launch event. It wasn't a press campaign. It was a simple, emotionally raw digital exhibition titled, "One Day, I Thought I Was Invisible." The campaign showcased real stories of healing women navigating single motherhood, veterans finding purpose post-trauma, teenagers rediscovering self-worth. The visual layers, soundscapes, and pacing were all generated through Kinetica, but every narrative pulse came from authentic human feeling. No dramatic music, no manipulation, just truth. Kim didn't need to write a caption. The community spoke for her. Comment sections filled with words like, "I felt seen," and "I didn't know anyone understood this part of me." Critics called it a redefinition of emotional marketing. Kim didn't call it anything to her. It was simply something she had once needed when she was younger, a quiet video whispering, "I see you," internally. Some asked whether Kinetica could be protected from copycats. Could others replicate the formula? Eleanor, now in a quiet advisory role, posed the question during a strategy session. How do we prepare for the flood of competitors that will try to mirror what we've done? Kim's answer came with a softness that silenced the room. We don't defend. Let them copy the tech. What they can't copy is the reason we built it. It wasn't bravado. It was conviction. By now, James had been promoted to head of narrative experience. He kept close to the ground, still in contact with old colleagues, still watching the cultural ripple unfold. He shared updates with Kim legal inquiries slowing down, user engagement soaring, partnerships being reevaluated. Nexora, once cold and metric-driven, was now quietly reorienting around something it had lost meaning. The final blow came not with fanfare, but precision. One day, a private message arrived. It was from Eleanor. "There's someone who wants to meet you," she said, privately. Kim didn't ask who. She already knew. The meeting took place not in a boardroom, but in a small glass atrium inside Nexora's West Campus, the same place where, almost a year ago, she had been told she was no longer aligned with the direction. This time, there were no spotlights, no walls lined with slogans, just sunlight. Across from her sat the entire new executive panel, and on the table, a revised charter Kim would hold co-founding credit for Nexora Studio West, a newly established integrated media lab built around empathy-based technology. She would oversee narrative ethics and emotional authenticity, a position that didn't exist before because no one had ever thought it necessary. Now, it was essential. They asked for her vision. She gave it calmly, clearly, without ego. A new system where creators were given credit and control, where AI served human experience, not the other way around, and where companies no longer measured value in silence, but in story. As the agreement was signed, Kim didn't feel triumphant. She felt aligned. She walked through the new workspace open rooms, soft lighting, quiet editing booths. On the front desk, a small plaque read, "The Empathy Media Institute, founded by Kim Kardashian." She stood still for a moment, letting it settle, not because she needed the title, but because the space finally reflected the soul that had once been overlooked. That evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific and LA turned golden and slow, she didn't post a thing, no statement, no quote, no photos. Her work was already speaking for itself. A few weeks after Nexora's quiet restructure, they held their first internal exhibition under the new leadership. There was no glamorous stage, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just a gallery of stories projected on slow-moving glass walls, each one created through Kinetica. These weren't advertisements. They were healing fragments, a war veteran describing his first breath of peace, a single mother speaking her startup into life, a 12-year-old girl revealing how she once felt invisible. The soundscapes, visuals, and pacing were generated through Kinetica's emotional framework, but the content wasn't artificial. It was real, sourced from human lives, narrated by their own voices, guided by a system built to amplify, not replace, empathy. Kim stood at the center of the room, watching it unfold, not as a guest, not as a symbol, but as a foundation. She didn't say much. She rarely did these days. Her presence was no longer a comeback. It was simply continuity. James, now head of narrative strategy, approached with a familiar rhythm, holding 2 coffees in hand, still the same, right, no sugar, no milk. She nodded with a quiet smile. Some things are worth keeping. He looked around at the quiet crowd, then back at her. You know, people here still say, if you hadn't come back, they might have stopped believing media could still be kind. Kim didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her eyes lingered on one of the projections, a young girl, maybe 12, saying, I thought no one understood me. Then I saw a video that felt exactly like how I felt. I cried, but it was the kind of cry that helped me breathe again. Kim tightened her grip slightly around the coffee cup, not from emotion, but from confirmation. She hadn't returned for applause. She had returned for justice, for clarity, for the kind of fairness only people who've once been discarded truly understand. At the end of the exhibition, Eleanor, now an advisor in name, only stepped onto a small platform and invited Kim to say a few words. She declined the mic. She didn't need amplification. She just spoke. I used to think that doing good work was enough. That silent effort would eventually be recognized. But the world doesn't work that way. It doesn't see you unless you step forward and say, I'm here. I matter. She paused, looked around, not for effect, but for presence. And sometimes, being pushed aside is what teaches us how to stand up again, not by asking for space, but by building it that day. Nexora formally announced the Kim Kardashian Creator Fund, an independent foundation designed to support creatives who had been silenced, erased, or exploited in corporate systems. It wasn't a publicity move. It wasn't compensation. It was a correction, a recalibration. Kim didn't join any talk shows. She didn't post viral reflections. She worked. She oversaw the deployment of Kinetica across multiple networks, not to replace emotion, but to restore it. Her teams used AI not to fabricate content, but to nurture real stories, from voice inflection to psychological pacing to contextual light dynamics. The technology wasn't generating for performance. It was guiding for truth. The first global campaign under her leadership required no tagline. It was titled, One Day. I thought I was invisible. She didn't write a caption. The internet did that for her. Some called it a new chapter in emotional storytelling. Others described it as the rebirth of humanized content. Kim didn't label it at all, to her. It was a quiet answer to a younger version of herself, back when she was told she was too soft, too emotional, too expensive. She never said, I told you so. She just made it undeniable. At a quarterly leadership session, Eleanor posed a quiet question. What happens when competitors try to copy Connecticut? The room turned to Kim. She answered as if talking about something as ordinary as tea. We don't defend against imitation. Let them replicate the system. What they can't replicate is why we built it. There was no arrogance in her voice, just a quiet understanding that legacy isn't in the code. It's in the cause. Caleb Vance, meanwhile, had quietly exited the media industry altogether. James, who still had friends in the old legal department, shared that Caleb had tried to explain away the copyright oversight, but the paper trail, the handwritten notes, the voice samples stored outside Nexora's servers, the emails ignored, all told a different story. There was nothing left to argue. His name faded. Kim's remained. A year later, Nexora hosted its first open forum since the restructure. No stage, just a circle of storytellers, developers, researchers, and survivors. The guests weren't influencers. They were people whose pain had become narrative, whose memories had become bridges, whose stories were now honored. Kim didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her fingerprints were everywhere, not just in the tech, but in the tone. As the event closed, she stood near a hallway window, watching the sun roll across the sea. James joined her again, a cup in hand, offering silence instead of questions. After a moment, he said, "You know, this place feels different now. Lighter, more awake." She nodded. That's what happens when truth is allowed to breathe. Then came a whisper of wind. Not metaphorical, real. It swept through the glass corridors of Nexora Studio West, rustling leaves by the entrance, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and sunlight. At the reception desk, a small plaque still read, "The Empathy Media Institute, founded by Kim Kardashian." She didn't need anyone to read it aloud, because now, she didn't need recognition to know it was real. She didn't come back to settle a score. She came back to change the story. And when she walked again through the same door that once had shut her out, the room stood not out of fear, not for show, but because they finally saw her, just as clearly as she had always seen herself,